You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.
Welcome. I am your host, Sol, and today we have a topic that all film buffs can relate to, film purism. That is, when you watch a film, is that all that you do? Do you always watch a film in one go? Motion pictures have come a long way since the Lumiere brothers terrified audiences with the arrival of the train nearly 125 years ago. Over that period, we have seen the invention of color processing, sound recording, 3D, widescreen lensing, and CGI, just to name a few of the biggest changes that cinema has undergone. As films have evolved, the way we watch them has evolved too. Once something only shown in carnivals or in cinema theaters, films became available via television in the mid-20th centuries, available on home video in the late 1970s, and available for legal streaming and downloading with an internet connection this century. With these changes, it is perhaps not surprising that the way we consume films has changed over time. And yet, there are still some out there dedicated to the ways of the past. A popular school of thought, which we are calling film purism for the purposes of this podcast, suggests that all films should be watched in as close to cinema conditions as possible. Is this really practical, though? Does this really help you to appreciate a film more? Film purists argue that copying cinema conditions pays respect to the filmmakers and artists involved. But with the rise of Netflix, legal streaming, and high-definition home video through Blu-ray, do filmmakers still expect their films to be watched under such conditions? In this episode, we will explore such conundrums and try and work out whether film purism is really something worth striving for. Today, I am joined by three wonderful co-hosts, Tom, Lauren, and Adam. Starting with Tom, would you like to introduce yourself and explain where you sit on the film purism spectrum?
Tom here from England. Film purism is a topic that is really quite close to my heart. As I'm a huge, passionate film fan, I like to make sure that whenever I watch a film, it is in the conditions that will give me the best opportunity to take the most out of the film. So whereas I can't always be in the cinema, which would be the dream every time I watch a film, I'd love to be in the cinema for it, I try and replicate those conditions as closely as possible in my own home so that I can get the most out of my viewing experience.
Lauren?
Similarly, I like to be in the perfect sort of mode for watching films so that it's my main focus, but maybe not to such an extreme. But I also, for me, like the cinema isn't the ideal place for me to watch a film. It's at home. And I grew up mostly watching films at home, so I think that may be a reason why the way I watch a film is not to replicate the cinematic experience necessarily.
And finally, Adam, can you tell us where you sit on the film purism spectrum?
I mean, I think I prefer to watch films at the cinema, but when I do watch them at home, because I'm normally watching them on my laptop, I tend to... I do pause the films. I do other stuff sometimes in the background. I think I do a lot of things that Tom would probably stand against, but we'll see what he thinks throughout this episode.
Like Lauren, I grew up watching films mainly at home, so I've never felt the need to replicate cinema experience when watching a film. And just like Adam, I probably do a lot of things that would make Tom really stop in horror and gasp in horror at what I do, but that's the whole idea of this podcast, to try and work out what are different takes on watching films alike, because we're all very passionate about cinema, but the way we watch it varies quite a bit. So I'm going to try and start with my first question, and my first question is, how often, it could be once a day, once a week, once a month, never, how often do you watch a film in more than one go? What's your take?
I very rarely watch a film in more than one go. I love watching a film in a single sitting, which isn't always possible. But when I'm putting on a film in an evening, if it's a long film, I'll sometimes kind of gauge how tired I am and whether I'm going to make it through the whole film. if I don't think that I'll be able to stay awake and stay focused for the 2 hours of the film, I won't start watching it and then finish it the next day. I'll just do something else because I like to be completely in the zone and focused so I can get the most out of the film. The very rare occasions when I will watch a film in more than one sitting will be if it's an incredibly long film, or if it's a film that I'm watching someone else who perhaps hasn't got the same viewpoint as me. So recently I've been watching a few Stanley Kubrick films with my girlfriend, and luckily enough, Kubrick actually built in interludes in some of these films like Barry Lyndon and 2001. So whereas I would rather watch them in the one sitting, I've seen them before, so I don't mind splitting them up. It does kind of make it more digestible, perhaps, for people who haven't got the same outlook as I have.
That's a very interesting point, Tom, about interludes. And a lot of the very long films back in the day, in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, had those interludes in there, those intermissions where you could take a break, get some popcorn, and then come back. And the big purist question is probably, do you fast forward through the music when you watch it on DVD or Blu-ray, or do you actually sit through the entire interlude for those DVD and Blu-ray releases that include the interludes in them? And I actually really love that term, in the zone, that you described. But we'll move on to Lauren now, and we'll find out what Lauren's experiences are and how often she watches a film in more than one go.
Yeah, so similarly to Tom, I very rarely watch a film in more than one sitting. The only times that I would ever do that would be if I noticed that I was just getting too tired or I had a headache or something like that. And there's been a couple times where I've misjudged how long the film is going to take and I have work or I have to go out somewhere or something like that. And otherwise I prefer to watch it all in one sitting if possible, but I also will break it up if it's a really long film over maybe 4 hours. Otherwise I'll watch it straight.
That's a very good point, Lauren, about knowing how long films are and sometimes misjudging it. Because I know I have a large number of DVDs that have got the incorrect running time printed on the back of them. And sometimes IMDb's information is not entirely up to date either. And let's hear from Adam and see whether he can beat me before I let you guys know how often I'll watch a film in more than one go.
For me, it's probably a regular thing, to be honest, because it depends. I think if I watch a film during the week, I'm more likely to pause it at some point, depending on how busy I am, how busy I've been at work, that kind of thing. And if I'm really into a film, I'll watch the whole thing in one go, certainly. Sometimes even staying up late, being tired the next day. But when I'm watching films on my laptop, it's quite common for me to pause them at some point because I get quite easily distracted by other things. And, quite often I'll watch a film in two goes.
And then coming back to myself, how often do I watch a film more than one go? I would say once a day, maybe once every 2 days, at least several times throughout the week. I watch a lot of films and I can very easily put a film down, so to speak, and then pick it up and start watching it again. Me watching a good film is equivalent to reading a good book. You don't read a book in a single sitting, and likewise with a really good movie, it will work over multiple sittings. Obviously, I prefer to watch films in one go. If it's something that I know is going to be long enough, I try and give myself enough time to be able to watch in a single go. However, if it gets too late, if something comes up and I have to go out, not the end of the world for me. If I need to do shopping or do something else before a certain time, I don't mind stopping the film, doing shopping, coming back before the shop's closed. It works perfectly fine for me. Nice ideal to be able to not interrupt it, but there are actually some films that I think benefit from being watched in more than one go. So on the subject of films that benefit from being watched in more than one go, I've got a couple of examples. I want to see if any of you guys have examples of films that you think actually benefit from being watched in chunks rather than all the time, all at once. And we'll start with Tom.
Due to my view on film purism, I don't have any examples of films that I think would benefit from being watched in chunks. I would always take the option of watching a film in one sitting, so I don't actually have any examples, I'm afraid.
Okay, that's all right, Tom. I was sort of suspecting you wouldn't have any examples. Move on to Laura now and see if she can think of any films that really benefit from being watched in chunks.
I'm not sure if any particular films do benefit, but I think the main film that I watched in chunks was Satan's Tango, because there was no day where I was going to have 7 hours of uninterrupted film watching to get through that. So I watched it about 1 hour each day for a week. But pretty much the only time I think a film would work like that is if it's episodic in nature or a miniseries. Otherwise, I feel like any film would benefit from just being watched in one sitting.
So I actually watched Satan's Tango in one sitting one day. It was quite a grueling experience, and I probably wouldn't do it again. Sadly, it wasn't a film that really resonated or connected with me on a personal level. I didn't dislike it, but it didn't particularly impress me that much. But I'm glad that I saw it in one sitting because, as I've said before, I think that's just what the filmmakers intend. And I know that there have been instances where Satan's Tango will be shown in cinemas. So it would have been nice to have watched it in the cinema for 7 hours, but I don't know, Cope, because I think when I watched it, I probably did have a couple of toilet breaks to get through it.
Very interesting points there from Tom and Lauren. Lauren brought up miniseries, and I think it's a really good thing to consider because what Tom said is he's looking at how films were designed to be watched. And if you go with one of my all-time favorite films, Fanny and Alexander, I've only seen the miniseries version. I've always watched it in as much as one go as I can for me, but Bergman never intended it to be seen that way. So are we actually not respecting the director's vision if we watch a miniseries all at once? I don't know. Is there anything to discuss? We'll go over to Adam now and see if Adam can think of any films that benefit from being watched in more than one go.
For me, I don't really think of it in terms of the film itself. I think of it in terms of, the mood I'm in. And if I'm tired, then it's going to be beneficial to finish it the next day. Because if I'm sitting there watching like a 4-hour film, by the end, maybe I'm not concentrating as much. And I also think some films that are a bit lighter, some comedies, some films that are, especially films that aren't as great, I would say, watching them in like more than one sitting doesn't really affect it too much. Whereas perhaps a really intense film, like a classic film, that kind of thing is something I'd want to watch definitely in one go. But when it's a film that's not as great, or it's a kind of comedy, something like that, I think it doesn't make that much difference if you watch it in more than one sitting. I don't know when you want me to talk about Sit and Tango and my experience about that, and I can leave it until later if you want.
I haven't actually seen Satan's Tango, so I'm curious if there's anything you'd like to share about it.
Well, it's slightly embarrassing to bring it up, especially when we have, Tom, who's the president of the Film Purism Club, as part of this podcast. And I also, I don't want to risk getting removed as admin on the ICM forum either. But I watched Satan's Tango, it must have been about 10 years ago. And yeah, I feel like I'm making a confession now. It's quite difficult to say it out loud. It's easier to type it than to speak it. But for that particular film, and I think it's the only film I ever did this for before I start getting hate mail, I fast forwarded parts of it, the scenes where not a lot was happening, like there was like cows standing for like 10 minutes. I kind of watched that part on fast forward, and I feel ashamed to admit it in front of Tom, but everyone makes mistakes when they're younger, and I am kind of joking, in case people aren't sure. But yeah, for me it was like a 7.5-hour film, and at that point I really wasn't ready to watch that kind of thing. I got a bit sick of it, to be honest, and yeah, I think it's the only time I fast forwarded. But yeah, that was my unfortunate story of Satan's Tango. And Tom, I hope you forgive me.
I forgive you, Adam, although it is kind of blasphemous, but it made me laugh as well because I'm just thinking, what did that extra 10 minutes of me just watching a cow standing still really bring to my life? Because it wasn't a film that I particularly enjoyed anyway, but I don't think I'd ever fast forward something, but each to their own.
It was a one-time thing, Tom, okay? So please don't use that as your judgment of me as a person.
Well, after Adam's confession, I'm going to go to films that I think benefit from being watched in chunks. is a film from Gore Verbinski called A Cure for Wellness. I thought this film massively benefited from me watching it in chunks because I was really busy with work that week. I couldn't watch it all in one night. And it's a 2.5 hour film. So I think I watched it over 3 nights, and it was really cool because it actually affected my dreams as I was sleeping and thinking about it. It's a mystery movie, and you're trying to work out what's happening and the weird things that are going on with this asylum. I had all these theories in my head. And it was absolutely amazing going to bed 2 nights, having to think about it as I'm going to sleep, and then finishing it the next day. So I thought that one really benefited from being seen in multiple goes. What's actually interesting on this topic is that at the moment I'm in the middle of watching another long film, which again I've been watching in chunks. It's the latest Spike Lee one, Five Bloods. I've watched it in 20 to 25 minute segments so far. I'm actually enjoying watching in segments because the film is all about these friends who are coming back and reuniting, and it's given me an appropriate time to be able to watch and sort of get into this space of these friends coming together, seeing themselves after all these years of them planning to do this thing to rescue this gold that they stole 45 or 50 years ago. And I'm curious to finish it, but I'll probably finishing it again in maybe 2 or 3 goes. I don't think I'm going to watch the final hour and a half of it all at once. And the other thing which is interesting is that it's a Netflix film. And one of the things I said in the intro is, with the rise of Netflix, are filmmakers these days expecting people to watch their films all in one go? I don't know. I'm sure Tom will have something to say about this.
Yeah, I'm literally dying inside hearing you say this. So it's crazy to think that, you'll happily watch a film in, 5 or 6 parts. I'm kind of curious as to when you would choose to stop the film. Do you try and wait until it's in a good point to stop the film, a gap in the story, or will you just stop it when something else comes along that you need to do outside of the film?
I will actually wait till the gap in the story. I was about to say I'll pause it mid-sentence. No, I'll wait until it changes scenes and it goes to a different location, and then I'll stop and do whatever I need to, and then come back to it afterwards.
Okay, so that's not as bad as I thought, but still, I don't know how you get by on that. Because I always think if you stop, say, a horror film partway through, you potentially lose the sense of the atmosphere. It might interfere with a good jump scare, for instance, because you obviously will never know what's coming next in the film. So stopping it kind of runs the risk of interfering with, whatever the filmmaker has intended to come next.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, Tom, but The Five Bloods, which is credited as a war drama, every source that I can tell, it's not a film that moves with that intensity. I like the intensity description that Adam brought up a few minutes ago. If it was a really intense film, like let's say the Bruce Willis classic Die Hard, I'd always watch that in one go, maybe 2 at the most, because there's something constantly happening all the time. And it's a film about friends getting back together and talking, and the pacing isn't quite there. I think it works a bit better. And A Cure for Wellness is a film like that. It's like a mystery novel. It all goes along at a methodic, slow pace. It sort of helps, or I found that it helped to break it up a little bit. I agree that if it was a horror film, especially one of those jump scare horror films, of which there are far too many today, that wouldn't be an ideal film to try and watch in chunks.
Well, I was going to add to the tension discussion. When I watched Uncut Gems, which I watched at home, I was actually getting so anxious and my heart was pounding too much that I actually had to pause it and take a break and go for like a quick 10-minute walk just to calm down, because I actually just couldn't sit there and watch it. It was like hurting me too much. But otherwise, if I'm really into a film, I usually I don't want to pause it and stop it. But in that case, I was actually just too, viscerally affected, and I had to stop.
Just mention, it's not so much that I want to pause it and I'm actively looking for, can I find the part where they stop talking so I could finally pause this and do something else, then come back to it. I'm not quite so ADHD like that. I am a little bit, but I'm not quite like that. It's just more of that if I've got something to do, like do some shopping, I don't mind waiting to the end of a scene, pausing it or stopping it, then coming back and resuming it afterwards. Or if it's getting really late at night, I don't mind stopping it and then resuming it the next day. But I'm not actively looking forward to, oh, let's see how many chunks I can break this up to just to annoy Tom. I'm not quite like that, or at least not yet.
I have a couple of questions for Saul, if you don't mind. Do you find that you enjoy certain films more because you've broken it up into chunks? And also, do you ever purposely watch it in chunks because you enjoy the film so much and that extends the kind of viewing time? So you're watching a film over 2 days, so you get 2 days of enjoyment rather than just 2 hours.
That's an interesting question, Adam. With The Cure for Wellness, I did find that I thought I was enjoying it more because I was watching it in different chunks. Yes, there is a big question of what constitutes a chunk. I'd say for a chunk, it would need to be at least 20 minutes. I can't watch like 1 minute here, 1 minute there, 1 minute there, unless it's something which is really experimental and out there, or Andy Warhol's Empire, if I ever see that. But in 20 to 30-minute chunks, yeah, there are some films that are really enjoyable. It's nice to be able to carry over. It was nice to be able to do that with A Cure for Wellness, although I don't know if I would have as much as I was enjoying it if I didn't have the work commitments the next day.
But also I thought because I watched Satan's Tango in chunks, even though I didn't like the film, I found it more easily digestible because it's not really my type of film, and I feel like it's possible I would have liked it less if I hadn't broken it up like that.
That's actually a very good point, Lauren, because every so often I will start watching a film and I'll realize very soon into it that I'm not in the mood for it. And that's a good type of film to sort of break it up. Because with a film that you start watching and you realize, yeah, this isn't doing nothing for me, pretty much the worst thing you can do for yourself is to force yourself to endure it. It's only going to go down in your estimation. There's definitely a lot of talk-heavy, dialogue-heavy films from the 1930s and early 1940s before they started getting artistic. Lots of films from that era I have watched in chunks, and I found them easier to digest in chunks because there's so little actually going on in them beyond the characters and the dialogue. And it's easier for me to take it here, a bit there, rather than have to force myself to watch an artistically boring film for 90 minutes in one setting. Our producer Yoka has said that if she's not in the mood to watch a film, she actually won't just stop it and start it again. She'll stop it, she'll go back to the beginning and then start from the beginning again, which, technically might be the better thing to do. I don't know, it probably depends on how long you're leaving before you go back to carry on watching it.
That's an interesting point. I'm never not in the mood for watching a film, but there will be times when I know that I'm tired or my focus is lagging. And when that's the case, I will always punt for like a horror film with a short runtime, something easy, so I'm still going to be able to get my film fix, but I know it's something that doesn't require much investment or focus. And in that way, I will try and save other films which require more concentration for time when I know that I'm going to be able to give myself fully to the film.
Yeah, I have another question, since apparently my role today is to ask questions. Tom, what would you do if and you'd watched half the film, you'd watched 3/4 of the film, like a power cut or something like that? Would you start the entire film again, or would you ever continue where you left off the next day or a couple of days later?
That's a great question, Adam. I'm not sure what I'd do. I don't think that I'd want to restart the film from the start if I was quite a way through it. I suppose it depends on the quality of the film and how much I'm enjoying it. It's an interesting point to raise because I've actually had experiences quite similar to this in the cinema a few times, not necessarily with power cuts, but things where a cinema has started playing the film, but there's been no sound for like the first 10-15 minutes, and then the sound comes on in 15 minutes and it's just played on. And for that instance, I can't remember the film. It wasn't something particularly great, but that was incredibly frustrating. And there's been a few instances where, due to the shoddy work of projectionists in cinemas, that things like that have happened. And as you can imagine, that absolutely infuriates me.
So it's not a film, but recently I went to see The Lion King, the musical, and it came to the climax where Scar and Simba are on the cliff, and then something went wrong with like the props, or something went wrong on the stage. So then everyone is waiting in the audience for half an hour for it to start again. And it completely ruined the experience because all the tension and everything is gone. And then in the end, instead of them going up a cliff and kind of falling from the cliff, they did the whole scene just standing on the ground. So that was an experience, obviously not in a film, but that was an experience where the pause really ruined the experience. And I can imagine that could also happen in a cinema if you're watching a film and it's at like a really important stage and then something goes wrong.
Adam, that's really interesting. I've never had that happen in a play before. That has happened in the movie theaters a couple of times, and I've just accepted and gone along with it. We'll move on to our next question now, and it's one where I think most of us will be able to answer. I don't know what Tom's answer will be because he's a film purist, but the next question was, do you ever pause a movie while watching it? For example, I'm not laughing. For example, ever pause a movie to go to the toilet? Can't keep this in. Or to take a phone call.
I know that Tom is such a film purist that he will not go to the toilet if he needs to. He will just stay sitting there. This resulted in lots of embarrassing experiences, but it's worth it for him.
I'm worried now that you've got this vision of me just sitting on the sofa watching a film, wetting myself, just because I don't want to move from watching the film. That is not
unfortunately, I did get that vision
happen
while I was reading out the questions. So, anyway, if you can answer it seriously, maybe the phone call one, and just go by the toilet one.
Well, the reason why I don't need to take a break for the toilet is because I make it a point of going to the toilet before I watch a film. Whether I'm at home or whether I'm at the cinema, whether I need to or not, I will go to the toilet. I just want to make sure that I don't have a break during the film. And that might sound ridiculous to some people, but I just thought you might want to hear about it anyway, so I'd share it. When it comes to taking a phone call, that would not happen because when I watch a film, I put my phone on mute, so it won't ring, it won't vibrate, and I put it in another room so it's out of reach, so I don't even know if someone's calling me. Thankfully, in this day and age, we don't have a house phone because we don't have a need for one. So the only interruptions would be if someone knocks on the door. And when I'm watching films with my girlfriend or friends, I will encourage them to do the same with a phone, but not to the extreme that, I will make them put their phone in another room, make them put it on silent, each to their own. But I will obviously encourage that to try and keep the film purism going and replicate cinema conditions as closely as possible.
It's really some dedication there, Tom. Being able to put your phone in another room. I guess if you're not expecting any emergencies but you're going to be not going to be contactable if there's an emergency and your phone's in another room. For work, I actually need to have my phone with me. Maybe not at night, but I actually need to have it with me. So, not really an option for me.
I think it's because as well, obviously, you're not meant to be on the phone in the cinema. So I always got in the habit of specifically turning my phone off in my pocket whilst I was in the cinema. So when I'm at home, putting it in another room on silent, it's just the same as if I was in the cinema. So yes, I'm on no one can get hold of me. But if it was to happen and an emergency was going on and someone needed me in the cinema, they wouldn't be able to get hold of me anyway. So we'd just have to wait until the end.
Just have this vision of you, Tom, going to the cinema and begging the people at front counter, can you please hold on to my mobile phone because I don't want it with me in the cinema.
There have actually been instances where I had to hand my phone in for preview screenings, and that's quite a nice feeling because everyone in the cinema, they've not got their phone on them, so there's not going to be any interruptions. Your phone was, and they put them all in separate bags. And you know what? If that was implemented across all cinemas for every screening, I'd be a very happy man. But people don't want to part with their phones, do they? So yeah, it'd be tough to carry out that for every cinema going.
I can ask Tom if he gets people to sit in the background of his house, in the lounge, for example, eating popcorn and making noises and being annoying so that he can shout at them and kind of replicate the cinema experience. Is the floor sticky, from all the food and everything? How far do you go to make it so it's excellent? Do you bring the bad quality of the cinema in as well?
It's just the good qualities. So yeah, much as that sounds like fun potentially for you. That would be my idea of a nightmare. Just people munching on the popcorn behind me and talking and stuff.
Hopefully one episode one day we can come into Tom's house and annoy him in the background or something.
We could stream it live.
Yeah.
See the reactions and the horror.
Okay, well, we'll move on now and we'll find out whether Lauren takes phone calls.
Well, I never get phone calls. I haven't had a phone call in pretty much years, so I definitely don't have to worry about that. I do pause quite often to take care of various bodily functions. And also, I used to always watch films alone in my room, so I didn't really get interrupted. But since I don't live alone anymore, sometimes people wander out of their rooms into my space, and it doesn't really interrupt me, but I do like to pause it and wait for them to leave to continue the experience without the little interruption.
Okay, Adam.
I react to phone calls while I'm watching a film pretty much the same way I react to phone calls in general. You know, I will answer it. Maybe if I'm enjoying the film so much or it's at a crucial point and I know the phone call isn't that important, I might just ignore it until later.
The question I've got relates a little bit to the phone one, depending or assuming you're all using smartphones, is do you look at your phone, computer or iPad screen, or here's a big one, do you look at your watch while watching a movie? And we'll get our film purist Tom to respond to this one first. Find out if he has to restart a film from the beginning if he accidentally glances at his watch.
Funnily enough, Saul, I don't actually own a watch, so I'm fine. So I've dodged that one already. And you know that I won't look at my phone or computer screen while watching a film. So my gaze is almost permanently fixed on that screen for the duration of the film.
Oh, I think I know what I'm going to get Tom for Christmas this year. A watch. But it is quite interesting. I don't wear my watch when I'm outside the house, but I do have a Fitbit that does have the time on it. We'll see what Lauren says.
I will check the time occasionally if it's really boring, or if I have work or I have something on later where I need to keep an eye on the time. But I never really take my eye off the screen for more than a second or two. And if I get a message or something like that, then I'll pause and have a look. But generally, I won't look away as much as I can.
It's very interesting, Lauren. Very dedicated then to watching the film properly. We'll see what Adam has to say about looking at screens or phones or watches while watching a movie.
Kind of related to this. I mean, I watch everything on VLC media player, and it has the runtime, you know, it has how many minutes are left in the film. So I feel like that's something that might distract Tom. So depending on how much I'm enjoying the film, I might be also checking how long is left. If it's something I'm really hating, I'll be thinking, oh my God, there's 47 minutes left, for example. So that is one thing I do look at. And I think for me, the big downside of watching it on a laptop is if I'm not that into the film, you know, maybe I'll check something else that I need to check, like my email or something. So I won't actively be doing anything else while I'm watching the film, but maybe I'll quickly browse something like BBC News, for example, if it's a particularly boring part of the film. Again, I would like to say I'm sorry to Tom, you know, for any distress that these answers are causing. But yeah, I'd rather not watch it on my laptop. You know, I'd rather watch everything on TV. But just the way the world is now, I watch a lot of things on my laptop, and it has downsides as well.
You do not have to apologize at all for distressing Tom, Adam, because my answers, I promise you're going to distress him even more. Do I look at my watch while watching a film? I would say yes, probably all the time. Not every single second during the film, but I can't remember the last film that I've actually watched without looking at my watch, at least once. I guess it's just become a bit of a habit over the years. Even if it's a film that I'm enjoying, I'll probably just check, you know, once or twice or whatever and see how much longer I've got left of it. If it's a film that I'm really disliking, though, then yes, looking at the timeline, seeing how long is left, is actually something that helps me get to the end of the film. If I was sitting there and having no idea how much longer was left, it would actually be quite torturous. I've actually got an interesting comment about that. The DVD of Federico Fellini's La Dolce Vita, for whatever reason, the DVD on the Australian release doesn't actually have the time codes on it. So when I was playing on my DVD player, I couldn't see how much was left of it, which was really infuriating because for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's a very wandering and meandering film. It does pick up around halfway in when one character does something unexpected and it causes the Marcello Mastroianni character to reflect on his life. The first half of the film, up until that's very meandering, and just watching and going, I've lost track of how much longer I've got left. It was really a bit of an type of experience for me. Generally, in terms of looking at stuff, I will look at my watch, I'll look at my phone. If it's not a particularly great film, I will be known to do a quick refresh of icmforum.com to see who has posted what. So that does happen occasionally. Something I'm doing every single minute during a film, not on my phone every single minute, but it is something I'll do from time to time. And it's not something that I'd really apologize for either, because I think, going back to my intro, it's just about the way films have evolved and the way we experience them and process them has also evolved.
I think that looking at the runtime and what's left of a film could potentially spoil. Say I look at the runtime and there's only 2 minutes left to go. I know the film's going to end then, and it would be wrapping up at some point, and I like to just get completely immersed in the film. So I think it would detract from me because I know that the plot is going to come to an end very shortly. If, for instance, I looked to find out how much on there.
Yeah, I think last week I was watching a film and my boyfriend came out of his room and I paused it and he was like, "Oh, how long's your film got left?" And I checked and it was 1 minute. And I was like, "Oh, okay." I think I just spoiled it.
That's a very interesting point about run times. Although one thing which I would add on the table is that all films have a different length of end credits. There are some films, including recent films, where I've watched until maybe about 2 minutes left and then the end credits roll, and you sort of expect them to start rolling about 6 or 7 minutes before the end. Sometimes a film can surprise you and have more in store for it. But I do agree with some films, especially some films that have got very powerful, abrupt endings. It would possibly take a bit of the punch out of it if you know that it's about to end and then it does actually end. This question about the end of the films actually brings us to our next question of the podcast, which is whether you stare at the screen during the end credits. I'm sure Tom does. Or whether you do something else while the end credits are playing. Is there actually anybody in this podcast session who actually stops a film before the end credits? I know Yoka, our producer, will only watch the end credits if she knows there's something at the end of them. But most people that I know start leaving the cinema as soon as the end credits start rolling. So what do you guys do? Do you stick around? And if you stick around, do you stare blankly at the screen and look at all those names that you have no idea what on earth they refer to? And we'll get Tom to start off with us again.
So I usually like to watch the end credits if possible. Enjoy listening to the music that's played over the end credits, and also it just gives you a time to, digest the film that you've watched and just think about things. Perhaps one of the reasons I do this is that I used to volunteer at an independent film theatre, and before the film started, they would have an announcement that some people want to watch the end credits. Please remain in your seats until the end credits have finished and the lights have come up. Now, that didn't always have the desired effect. You would obviously have some people who would just, get up and try and leave discreetly. And sometimes you would have members of the audience tutting at the people who were leaving early. I wouldn't go that far, but it would happen. There are instances as well where I'd like to watch the end credits because there's potentially a scene at the end that the filmmakers have put in, like a teaser for the next film in the series. But there are occasionally instances where I don't watch the end credits. Perhaps it's because it's a film that I've not particularly enjoyed, so I'm not bothered about staying for them. Or if I'm with a group of friends and they all start getting up and leave, I'm not going to sit there and remain on my own to watch the credits. I'm just going to go along with them for the ride for that one.
You make a very good point, Tom, about the music and the end credits. I love end credits music. But as soon as the music starts, I hop off to my laptop and I start looking up the film on Letterboxd or on iCheck Movies. start reading some reviews and what other people have had to say while the music is going in the background. That's actually a really good experience for me. I love looking at reviews that way while that music is sort of playing over. But I'm not actually focused on looking at the screen, looking at all the end credits and reading what the best boy did and what all the drivers did and where it was shot and all the copyright for the music. But we'll find out now what Lauren's take is and whether she watches end credits until the end.
I have never watched the credits. Aside from when I've been at the cinema watching a film which we know has a scene after the credits and the people that I'm with want to watch it, I don't care about scenes after the credits.
Oh, that's interesting. I actually might be more of a purist than Lauren, even though, unlike Tom, I'm not sitting there watching every single person's name. I actually do play the end credits. Interesting to find out with Adam and see whether Adam plays the end credits and whether he reads every single name if he does it, or whether he just lets the music sink in while he does other things.
Okay, I have a couple of points on this. At the cinema, sometimes I stay. The main reason I would stay is because I'm hoping there's a scene after the credits, depending on which film it is. Or sometimes it's nice to just sit in the cinema after like an intense film, hear the music at the end. I'm not, in terms of reading the credits, I only really read anything if there's someone in it that I want to check their name, for example. One thing that this conversation actually made me think of was something I really, really hate. So if you're watching a film on Netflix, sometimes you want to watch the end credit, there's a song, there's something you want to hear, and then Netflix has this awful habit of like trying to force you to watch something different, as soon as the end credits start. Or you're watching like a TV series and you're on episode 1 and then it gets to the credits and it instantly takes you to like episode 2. But you're like, hey, I was watching something on the credits. It really is so frustrating because obviously their purpose is to make you watch something else, but you don't get I'm not some kind of purist that I need the credits, but I want to get to choose when I can finish or not. And I want to hear the song. I want to read something in the credits. I don't want to be forced to move on to the next thing. So that is one thing. And I think the whole, Netflix probably has a very negative effect in terms of film purism. And whilst I'm not a film purist in the same way as Tom might be, there are aspects of Netflix and streaming which frustrate me and I think take away from the enjoyment.
Something that really frustrates me as well, Adam. When I'm watching the end credits, I'm not specifically reading every name, reading everything that's going by. There may be an actor or actress that I'm curious about and I just want to find out who played a certain character. Or there may be a few songs that I've really enjoyed in the film that I want to listen to again afterwards. So I'll look out for the film music at the end of the credits and stuff like that. It's useful. I enjoy doing that.
I thought Adam also had a very interesting point there about Netflix because it annoys me to no end also because, as I've said before, I actually really love listening to end credits music, even if I'll never read the names. It's actually got to the point where sometimes I'm on the treadmill and I have to sort of jump off the treadmill and space over to the TV where the computer's plugged into and I have to like stop it and minimize or maximize it so it starts playing the credits, not playing the trailer for the next thing that's suggesting for me. Related to that, because now I've mentioned that with the treadmill, one of the things that I do when I watch films is I actually go on the treadmill. So I actually exercise while watching a movie. I think, in a film purism sense, I think that actually is still film purism because I'm actually still watching the movie the whole time. My eyes are straight forward. My legs are doing something though, so I'm actually getting a bit of fitness in at the same time. But it's not just exercise. Something else which you can also do quite easily while still looking at the screen is eating. I don't know, definitely in cinemas, there are a lot of people who will eat during a movie. Lauren just asked, do I walk or run? No, I walk on the treadmill. I think if I was running on the treadmill, it could end up being a little bit dangerous if something unexpected comes out and shocks me in a horror film, and I might go, and fall off. I actually have kind of done that already a couple of times just with walking. But no, it's just walking. It keeps me fit. I don't mind doing. I can still see the screen the whole time. Same with eating. I will have been known to watch a film while I'm eating lunch or while I'm eating dinner if I'm eating it at home. Sometimes I will, sometimes I won't. It's nothing which I think really detracts from it because I am looking at the screen the whole time. I'm interested to find out this one, especially from Tom, because Tom has already told me before the podcast began. He already said, Soul, I don't eat anything during a film. I'm wondering about drinking. And with Tom's film purism, if he's getting thirsty, does he stop and get a drink of water, or does he just wait until the end of the film? And as usual, we'll go with Tom first.
Okay, so I usually don't actually have a drink when I'm watching films at home. I'll just sit on the sofa and hopefully I won't get thirsty. Another aspect of why I don't drink is because the more you drink, the more you need a visit to the toilet, right? So if you're watching a long film, a 3-hour film, and you've got, a drink there with you at the start of it, chances are, if you get through that drink, you're going to need to go to the toilet at some point or eat whilst watching a film. I love films that much that all I want to do is focus entirely on the film. I don't want to multitask. So my whole existence during the time that film on is just watching the film.
Tom, I need to ask something. Would you ever go to the toilet and leave the film running in the background so you can still hear it?
I don't think I would. If I was that desperate to go to the toilet, I would. I'm not going to go to those extreme. But that's a great question.
It's kind of interesting how this podcast is turning into a lesson on bodily functions, with Tom making that connection between going to the bathroom and drinking. The thing is, if your name is Soul and you get fitness in by doing treadmilling, you can't really treadmill and watch a film and not drink anything unless you're looking to collapse, which, maybe you might be. But I actually do need to drink water while I'm watching a film if I'm on the treadmill. And yes, it does mean that I might need to pause and go to the bathroom. But as we've already established, I'm not a film purist other than watching or listening to the end credits. I'll be interested to hear what Lauren's take is, whether she eats, drinks, or whether she exercises while watching a film.
Years ago, I used to watch TV while I was riding the exercise bike, or TV shows, but not films. But my Fitbit gives me a buzz 10 minutes to the end of every hour to do 250 steps, and I will just march in place for 2 minutes to get those in. Otherwise, I don't do any kind of exercise. I have a water bottle with me everywhere I go. I always have a water bottle. I have a water bottle next to me now. I take one to bed. I take one when I go out. I never go anywhere without a water bottle. So I happily drink while I'm watching a film, and I tend to eat. I try not to snack now because I try to eat healthier, but I do still snack, and I'll make dinner and I'll sit down with dinner and start watching a film, but I try not to get up to get snacks and come back, although that happens sometimes as well.
That's a good point about snacking, Lauren. I actually don't snack, or as little as I can. I try not to snack during a film because, I'm trying to be more healthy and I don't really find the need for it usually. If it's extremely boring, maybe I'll be looking and getting an apple out or something. But in terms of meals, I'd sit down happily and eat a meal and watch a film. It's usually quite an enjoyable experience. I can sometimes add extra flavor to the food. I don't know. Depends what you're watching, maybe. Anyway, we'll take it to Adam.
I feel a bit left out now, but I do not exercise while watching a film. I would drink watching a film, yes. I don't normally eat if I'm at home either. I mean, sometimes if I'm eating a meal, I'll watch a TV program, for example, but I do tend to find it can get really hard to concentrate on the film if you're eating at the same time. You're looking down, you're eating. It does actually distract me quite a lot. On the topic of drinking, I wanted to tell a quick story. So a few years ago, quite a lot of us from the forum went to see Napoleon. It was like a 7-hour orchestra kind of performance of it. And there was a lady next to me who got so into Napoleon that I had a bottle of water. I mean, it was a 7-hour film, so I had to drink sometimes. And every time I drank from the bottle of water, she had to put her hand up to cover the right-hand side of her face so she couldn't see me. So she took it to extremes. She was shouting at people behind us for eating and stuff like that. So there are people who are probably even more extreme than Tom is. But yeah, I also actually at the cinema, I tend not to drink that much. I don't drink before. I don't really want to have to leave halfway through the film and go to the toilet. I've done that before, and you're guaranteed to miss something really important, and it kind of ruins things a little bit.
Well, to add to that, when I saw Avatar at the cinema, I drank my water bottle in the first 30 minutes, and I spent the rest of the film desperate to go to the toilet. But although I'm happy to pause the film at home, I don't like to get up at the cinema, so that was pretty tough. And with people eating, I'm usually okay with it, but I did have this person next to me once, and he was eating this ice cream, and it took him 15 minutes, and he was slurping the hell out of it, and it was just the noisiest eating I've ever heard. It was actually painful, and I really wanted to smack the ice cream out of his hand. It was just horrible. And then he pulled out more food, and it was just, terrible.
That sounds like a complete nightmare. I would have had to have moved seats if there was a free one available somewhere else in the screen. And it's awful when you sat down and you're comfy in the cinema, you're ready for the film to begin. Someone just comes and sits down by you with a big ice cream or a big massive box of popcorn, and you know that they're just going to be munching on it all the way through the film. That can be really frustrating. Back to the subject of drinking during films, I remember that I do actually sometimes drink during films. If I've seen a film once and I love it, I want to watch it again, perhaps I'll watch it with a few beers just to really, relax, enjoy it and go with it. It's rare that I'll watch a film that I haven't seen before when I'm intoxicated, because again, that kind of interferes with my notion of being focused and in the zone when you're watching a film. But if I've already seen the film, I'm perhaps a bit more relaxed about my approach to film purity.
Oh, once again, I might be more of a film purist than I thought. I've never watched a film when intoxicated or on any kind of substance. I don't know if that's something which my co-host would like to add to now. If not, we'll move on to the next topic. Oh, Adam wants to talk about it.
So in fairness, so it's quite hard to be drinking alcohol while you're also on the treadmill at the same time. So there's probably a reason you haven't done it. That could be a disaster.
Exercise and eating and drinking water be acceptable. Still see what's happening on the screen, even if Tom doesn't like it. However, what about other multitasking? Do you do any other sorts of multitasking when you're watching a film? Something where sometimes you can't look at the screen 100% of the time? I know I do, but before I talk about the naughty things I do, I want to hear from my co-hosts and whether they multitask while they watch a film. And although Tom is going to say no, we'll still let him go first and see what he has to say on the subject.
You're just enjoying making me squirm today, aren't you, Sol? Because the idea of multitasking during a film just doesn't sit well with me at all. So no, I do nothing but watch a film. There's no multitasking going on when I've got a film on.
In all fairness, the multitasking that I'm doing is not something I have to concentrate on. Like writing a review or doing something for work at the same time, I wouldn't be able to multitask with that. I'm talking about very light, menial things, but we'll first see what everybody else has to say, because who knows, maybe somebody's got something that will make Tom squirm a little bit more than what I do, which is multitasking when watching films. Let's hear from Lauren and see what she does that's multitasking, if anything at all.
Well, I keep a notebook next to me and I write down notes as I'm watching so I can write my little review things afterwards. That's pretty much all I do multitasking wise these days. But I guess it also counts that when me and Adam used to watch films online, we'd have MSN back in the old MSN days, and we'd chat on there while watching the same film separately. We were just watching trashy bad films like the IMDb Bottom 100, a whole slew of terrible Turkish comedies and films like that. Usually I'd like to treat every film equally, but in those cases I think that was the only way to really get through them.
Hey, thanks for that, Lauren. We'll see if Adam has any other stories to tell before I make Tom's head spin with what I find myself able to do while watching a movie.
Yeah, I have been known to multitask during films, and I don't like that I do it, but I have been known to watch a film. Maybe I'm not enjoying it that much, or maybe I don't have to concentrate as much if it's something I've seen already. I've been known to have the film on like the left-hand side of the screen and then something else on the right-hand side of the screen, which probably makes Tom want to kill me. But yeah, so I think, yeah, there's just too many things available online. There's too much going on at once. I get easily distracted. My attention span can be terrible with this stuff. And I do find it quite distracting watching on the laptop, but that is my main way of watching films. So yeah, sorry again, Tom.
So, in terms of what I do, as I've said, it's nothing too demanding. It's nothing where I am looking at another screen or looking at something else which is going to really take my attention away. But I actually like to have a movie on while I'm doing the dishes and while I'm cleaning the kitchen counter. Very menial tasks. I can do them really easily. The way my house is set up, I'm able to face the TV as I'm doing it. I might be looking down for a second as I'm getting one dish and going to the next dish, but I wouldn't be watching something like a highly demanding foreign language film. I wouldn't be watching, an acclaimed classic. If it's something which I know is not a particularly great film in the first place, I don't mind having it on, looking away for a couple of seconds, maybe every minute or so, as I'm doing the dishes or as I'm doing some menial cleaning in the house. If Tom wants to react to this before we go on to the next question.
I can't imagine multitasking during a film. It just seems quite alien to me, to be truthful. I suppose it's due to my view of films and how much I enjoy them. And I just think that, everyone involved in that film, all the filmmakers, the actors, the people all behind the scenes who've put them together, they've spent so many hours, working on the film and getting it to the final product that we watch and enjoy, that it seems strange that we're not taking it all in whilst watching it. I don't know if this is a good comparison, but I can't imagine, say, going into an art gallery and looking at a picture, painting, and what if some bits of that painting were blurred out because the bits that you've not seen of the film, you know what I mean? You're not digesting the whole product. Things will be missed because you're not giving it your full attention. So, yeah, it just seems strange to me, but I know it's the way that some people watch films, so there's nothing wrong with that at all. It just, makes me squirm, as you can tell.
The art gallery painting analogy that you made, it's an interesting one, Tom. I would say that when I am watching a film while doing the dishes or while doing very light cleaning, it's not going to be anything where I need to concentrate on the screen. It'll be something where there's very dialogue heavy scenes. It would be a film that is very boringly shot. It would be something where I'm fairly confident that I'm not going to miss out on much by looking away for a little bit. And with any film, if I find afterwards that it turns out to be amazing, I've always got the opportunity to re-watch it under more ideal conditions. I find with the majority of films that are out there, or at least the ones that I tend to watch, there's a lot of scenes in which are not dynamic at all, and which if you look away for a couple of seconds, are going to end up watching very much. I've actually got a great idea now. Next time I want to watch the dishes, I'm going to put on that cow scene from Satan's Tango, so I can at least say that I've watched part of that film. Something else I might also mention before I let anybody else chime in is just about the respect to the artist, because that's something which I mentioned in the intro. It does seem a bit disrespectful in a way to not be giving full attention to a piece of art that was created, but a lot of it's about how the artist it to be seen. With filmmakers putting things on Netflix, different ways we consume films these days, do the artists really expect us to sit there glued to the screen the whole time? I don't know. And the other thing is they're not there. You've already paid for that rental, you've already paid for that disc, you've already given your money to be able to consume it. They're not there to watch you and see what you're doing. It's a bit different to live theatre. I wouldn't go into a play, even The Lion King, with them having to restart it for Adam. I wouldn't start washing dishes or doing cleaning during a live performance. But during a film, I think it's slightly different, especially if it's a film that isn't very heavy on the visuals and which is extremely heavy on the dialogue. See if anybody else wants to chime in before we go to our next questions, which are going to really hurt Tom's brain even further.
Well, I'm not that fussed about the artist. I do give them some respect by the fact that I'm giving their film a shot, and I try to pay as much attention as possible. Like, to me, film is an active hobby, not a passive hobby. It's not something I sit down to switch off my brain and enjoy. It's something that I not necessarily study, but something that I'm trying to be actively engaged with. But if the film isn't doing that for me and it's dragging me away, then that's just how it's going to be for that film.
Okay, it's interesting to hear that I'm not alone. I'm being happy to do something else if a film's not too engaging. We might move on to our next topic, though, and this is an interesting one, especially for our film purist. Tom, do you watch movies in the dark, or do you watch movies with the lights on? And we'll go to Tom first.
That you all already know the answer to this one. Obviously, I like to replicate cinema conditions, so I will watch films in the dark. I will draw the curtains during the day when I'm watching a film, so who knows what the neighbours think. Perhaps they think I've not got out of bed yet, but the living room curtains are more often shut than they are open, so that I can be in dark and enjoy the film in cinema conditions.
Yeah, not a surprising response at all, Tom, and I love the comment about the neighbours and what they might think. Although in my place also, I've actually got roller shutters and they stay closed most of the time. See what everybody else has to say before I chime in.
So this is actually something I am very passionate about. I very much like the darkness. When I lived at home, I actually had a makeshift foil cover for my window so that not like a sliver of light could come in. I always have the lights off when I watch a film. I even have, at my current place, the light sort of sneaks through the curtains, so I've pegged the curtains up so that less light comes through. I will not watch a film with the lights on. I hate it. I need total darkness. I don't even really like watching films during the day because I don't like the little bits of light that seep in. And even my kitchen window, because I live in an apartment where the kitchen window is just kind of blurry but doesn't have curtains, I've got a cardboard box fitting into the slot to prevent any light coming in because I don't want anything disturbing my dark cave when I watch my films.
That is some dedication, Lauren. I like the dark cave analogy and the idea of making makeshift slivers to cover up little bits of light from getting in.
I mean, I guess I prefer the darkness, but it's not something I think about that much, and I haven't gone to any great lengths like everyone else to make sure I'm in darkness. When Tom was speaking earlier, it did make me wonder if he puts trailers on before the film, if he puts adverts on, such as his desperation to replicate the cinema experience. But yeah, I do like in the cinema though that there's darkness, and that I think it does add something to the atmosphere of the film. It's quite difficult, at least in my flat. You know, you can hear noises from other people. It's quite difficult to replicate the cinema experience at home.
An interesting point here, inspired by Adam, and the fact that he can hear noises from other people in his flat. Now, the last two properties I've lived in have been specifically chosen for the fact that I can watch films as loud as I want without interruptions from my neighbours. I'm not even kidding here. So our previous property was flat. We specifically bought top floor corner flat so that I wouldn't have interruptions from other neighbours above me. I could be kind of as loud as I want with my surround system without having to worry about disturbing or upsetting other people too much. And we now live in a house that we bought specifically, looked for a detached one, because again, I want to be able to play my films as loud as possible without upsetting the neighbours. And I also want to get as little noise interferences from other people as possible. It sounds incredibly sad, but watching films is one of my big considerations when moving into a property.
Tom, can I ask one quick question? How much extra would you pay for a place in order to get a good film experience?
If I had the money, then I'd potentially buy a place that had its own personal cinema. That is the dream, really, isn't it? To have your own kind of cinema in your house. But I don't think that'll ever happen unless I win the lottery.
It's very interesting listening to my co-hosts and them talking about what they do for lightness and darkness, and Adam being quite blown away with some of the lengths that we've gone to. I haven't actually necessarily put up my roller shutters to keep the light out. I mean, that's an added benefit. The less noise is another added benefit, but not really the reason why. It keeps the house cooler. It's good for security. In terms of what I do with the lights on or off, if I'm watching a horror film, especially something by David Cronenberg or one of the Scream films, which I really like, I do like to have all the lights off. If I'm watching something outside of the horror genre, I'll usually have a light on, not directly over the TV, because any glare on the TV is incredibly distracting. I don't know. I guess I've grown up when I was younger watching films with a light on, so I usually do have a light on, unless it's something where I really want to replicate that experience of fear, especially the opening to the 1996 film Scream. She's all alone in the house by herself. That really benefits from being seen in the pitch darkness. Yeah, outside the horror genre, I would usually actually have a light on, although that I understand that doesn't make me quite the film purist, although I never advertise myself as being. Okay, we might move on to our next topic then. I've got 3 more questions left. Here's an interesting one. I know Tom's answer is no. We'll hear from our other co-hosts also. Have you ever watched a movie on your smartphone? We'll go to Tom just to hear his reaction, and then we'll find out if Adam or Lauren have.
Yeah, we know by now that I've not watched a film on a smartphone, and find it crazy that people would watch films that way. I've seen people when I've been at work and in past jobs where they'll watch a film on their phone on their lunch break, just in chunks, half an hour a day, and it just seems crazy to me. It takes away, well, I don't know, but I imagine it takes away from the whole experience. It's not something that I'd want to give a shot, because knowing how I like to watch films, enjoy the experience so much, I don't think it's something that sit well with me.
Well, no surprise there, Tom. We'll find out if Lauren has, and if she has watched a film on her phone, did she enjoy it?
I have never watched a film on my phone. I have heard from people who do, because they just think that, the visuals don't really matter that much, to be paying that close attention, so it's fine, which I find a little offensive. But otherwise, I'm not really fussed how big the screen is that you're watching it on, but I think a phone is just always too small, especially like I have really small hands and I need to have a small phone, and it would just be like pointless.
Screen size obviously affects how much we can take in of a film. And Yoka, our producer, has mentioned also about the screens in aeroplanes and watching in-flight movies. It'd be interesting to hear if Adam's got anything to say about that, or about watching films on his smartphone.
Well, first of all, in terms of the smartphone, I'm on Tom's side 100%. I would never ever watch a film on a smartphone, not even TV most of the time. I just think it's a terrible experience. When I go to work when I'm on the tube on the way to work, there's endless people watching films and TV on their smartphone on the tube, and I don't understand it. I mean, you're on the journey for like 15 minutes, half an hour. You're standing up, you have headphones in. I think it's an awful way to watch something, and I think it's part of the whole Netflix streaming kind of generation. Although it's not just young people that do it, it's everyone. In terms of watching films on a plane, I mean, most of the flights I've got are just to the rest of Europe, and they're only a couple of hours, so it's not normally even an option. But when I have been on like a longer flight, when I went to America, for example, I've tried to watch stuff, but I don't like watching it at all. I find it really hard to watch a film on the plane. There's too many distractions. You're sitting in the same position on the flight for so long. There's people all around you. You're excited about the holiday and stuff, or you're coming home. I think it's a pretty bad experience overall. I mean, it's not as bad as a smartphone, but I find it hard to do it.
As I'm in Australia, our shortest flight to anywhere is usually about 10 to 17 hours. So I have watched a lot of films on planes, but I really hate the screens and I feel like dizzy and tired. So I usually pick stuff that's a little easier to digest, but usually I'll sleep or I'll read because I find that is easier.
I don't actually mind watching films on planes, but I would specifically choose films that don't necessarily benefit from big screen and the full cinematic experience, and maybe, a low-key drama or a comedy or something like that. But I do remember one instance when I travelled to Vietnam, and I was quite excited about the chance to watch a few films on the plane. But I was incredibly disappointed because all of the films had Vietnamese subtitles on them, and there was no option to switch the subtitles off. And being the film purist that I was, I didn't want to watch a film which had foreign subtitles on the bottom all the way through it. So instead, I just sulked and tried to sleep for the most of the journey.
It's interesting that Tom's admitted that he actually would watch a film on a plane, so maybe he's not quite the film purist that we all thought. Although, as he said, if it's a low-key drama or a comedy, then yes, maybe, which is how I feel when I'm doing the dishes while I'm doing some menial cleaning while watching a film. It's not something which I know is not going to be absolutely amazing or incredibly visual. It doesn't really matter to me. The big question, though, whether I've watched a film on my smartphone, I don't know if the answer should be, of course, but the answer is not a recent film. I don't think there's any point watching films from, let's say, the last 80 years or so on your phone. I don't think you're going to get much out of it. From the mid-1940s onwards, films became very visual, and you're just going to lose tons of it if you're watching it on your phone. I have, from time to time, watched a silent film on my phone. Again, not a highly visual silent film, so I wouldn't be watching a Fritz Lang film or a Murnau film. But if it's just a light, breezy comedy or a light drama and it's a silent film, it's something easy I can do in public if I'm getting a little bit bored and I'm waiting around for something to happen. And as people know already, I don't mind watching a film in chunks. It's not something I do often. It's something which I might do maybe 10 or 12 times a year. Once a month sounds about right. We'll watch a silent film on my mobile phone. Yes, somebody could call me while I'm using the phone to watch a movie, but it will automatically pause it because I'm watching it on the YouTube app and it just automatically pauses it. Somebody could video call me also during the film. Okay, there's tons of possibilities in there. It's not a great habit to get into, but again, if it's a silent film, which I know isn't going to be very visual, if the title cards are large enough to read, I don't mind watching a silent film on my phone. I wouldn't really watch a sound era film on my phone. That just seems completely wrong to me.
Doesn't a silent film rely so much more on its visuals? You know, it seems a contradiction to me that you'd watch a silent film on a smartphone when the whole point of the silent film is almost entirely the visuals. Obviously, maybe a soundtrack. Seems kind of a contradiction. So,
is it a little bit of a contradiction if it's a late 20s silent film? And we still haven't had our podcast on the evolution of silent films. But generally, from 1924, 1925 onwards, silent films became very visual. They became very artistic. If you think about things like Sunrise, the films of Fritz Lang and all the German Expressionism, they really came about the mid to late 1920s. A lot of the films from the early 1920s and say 1919 are not films that are actually highly visual. A lot of them are about telling a story and getting a story out there. So I don't really find with those films it really diminished that much. If there was anything where I found that it did get diminished, I would rewatch it anyway. Just one of those things where you're standing around, you're bored, nothing is going on in the ICM forum because it's not busy enough and we need to get more active members. I'll be like, okay, well, maybe there's a silent film out there that's an official check on iCheck Movies that I might be able to watch for a little bit to keep myself amused. I don't know. Not a great habit, not something I do all the time, but something I'm not ashamed to admit that I will do from time to time. Reading the intertitles actually isn't usually that tough with the silent film. Mostly they've been done large enough because they're designed to be projected in a cinema. I know the irony watching on your phone. It's mainly if they have like letters or telegrams in there. That can get a little bit annoying because especially a lot of the older silent films rely a lot on telegrams and letters and so on to move the plot along. But look, in general, not something I would go out of my way to do. I'd always prefer to watch on a bigger screen, but it's not something which really impacts on me too much. Hey, Now we've got one of the most interesting questions, because on ICM Forum, we've got some challenges that we have going on each month, and they're very competitive, and people are always trying to fit in as many films as they can. So, something which has come up every so often is the question of, can you watch a film on fast forward? Can you watch it on 1.5 speed, on 2 speed, even on 1.25 speed? We know Adam has, for one film, fast forwarded a part of it. Obviously, Tom's never fast forwarded a film in his life. We'll get his reaction also, and then we'll find out if Lauren has fast forwarded any films, if Adam has tried it with any other films, and then I'll give you my take on the subject also. So first over to Tom.
Yeah, I've never fast forwarded a film whilst I'm watching it. Although it does kind of take me back to when I was younger, because maybe I have actually, when we used to have lots of films on VHS and I was a young viewer before my film habits really kicked in, I would potentially watch favourite bits of films over and over again. So that would involve either rewinding or fast forwarding the VHS to get to a specific place, so I could enjoy a certain scene over and over again. I suppose that was before my film habit really kind of took off and before I become as obsessed with films as I was. But yeah, I can't really say no to that question.
Oh, that's really interesting, Tom. I thought we were going to hear a confession from you. Do you remember this time when you fast forwarded? But yes, I think when we were all younger, we all did different things which weren't really film purism. Okay, let's hear from Laura and see if she's tried to fast forward any films.
I've only fast forwarded one film, which I think was Playtime, or it was one of those films, because I hate all of them. But it was just the last 10 minutes or so, because they're quite short films, but they feel like they're a lifetime, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. I just needed it to be done. So I think I 2 times sped through it, and that was the only time. It was awful.
Oh no, I love Playtime. I love Jacques Tati. Although Mon Oncle is the best of his 4 Monsieur Hulot films, but I absolutely love those films. I can't imagine fast forwarding through them because there's also many different small jokes and different things going on in the scenes that you're going to miss if you fast forward it. But it's all right. She said it was just the one film, so we'll find out from Adam and see if he's got another film other than Satan's Tango that he's tried to fast forward.
I don't remember doing it with any other films, but I have to back up Lauren on Jacques Tati. Of all the kind of classic directors, I find his films by far the worst. And any kind of comedy or humor value, I've never been able to find it.
Oh no, and I thought that Tom would be the person tearing his hair out during the podcast, and it's me, because I just love what Jacques Tati does in his films and how highly visual they are, and all the puns are visual storytelling, especially in Mon Oncle. And you got things like the house windows at night, and there's one person in each window, and they go from side to side, so it's like eyeballs moving around. They're all very cleverly done to the point where I'm not even sure how he manages to direct them. Yeah, it's a bit of a disappointment to hear, but everybody likes the same stuff.
I should say, I think I've only seen one of his films, by the way, so just in case. Mon Oncle, I think it was. But one film put me off of every other film he ever did. So I can't judge him properly, but the one film I saw, yeah, I almost vomited during it, which is coincidentally going to be our next episode, the Vomit Podcast.
Okay, Adam's joking, but by the way, guys, we're not really going to do one on vomiting unless Clem joins us again, because he's the one who gets off on vomiting horror films. Again, that might be a joke or not. You're going to have to ask Clem next time he's on. Anyway, getting back to Mon Oncle, it actually is, I think, the best of Tati's films. So if you didn't like that one, I think you're going to hate the others. So it's probably best you're not watching them. Getting back to me and myself, have I tried fast forwarding a film? I've tried it. It was very difficult. I actually had to go back and rewatch the scene because I was like, oh, well, some people are doing this. Some people are even boasting about it on the forum that they watch all their films on 1.5, 2 speed. And I'm like, let's see what happens. I tried it. I'm like, I can't keep track of this conversation. They are all talking too fast. I actually spent more time watching that film than I tried it on because I had to go back and rewatch that scene again. So I'm not much of a film purist, but fast forwarding is something that unfortunately I'm not capable of doing. We've got one more question left for my co-hosts, unless they've got any other questions of their own. And this is one that was brought up. I think Lauren suggested it before the podcast, is whether you would watch on English language films without subtitles or whether you would watch them with Google translated subtitles if you don't understand the language. And as usual, we'll go to Tom first and see what Tom has to say about this subject.
I don't think I'd watch films under either of those conditions, unless there was some kind of strange circumstances where it was perhaps a really obscure horror film without subtitles, no subtitles being created for it, and there's not much dialogue. Maybe I'd take a punt on it if that was the only way of watching it, but neither of those ideas really appeal to the film purist in me at all.
Yeah, I like what you say about the only way. And again, yeah, it would depend how much dialogue is really in there. But we'll go to my other co-host first before I talk about my experiences with watching films without subtitles when I don't speak the language. So, Lauren, what have you got to say on the subject?
I've never watched a film without any subtitles. That's not in English, but I have watched a few with very poorly translated Google subtitles. We only did a few. This was back in the watching trashy Turkish comedies and stuff like that, and they didn't have any English subs. So we found Turkish ones and translated them to English. And the thing is that they're comedies, not good comedies, but so much is lost in translation as it is, and then even more is lost in badly translated Google subs. So I don't really have any idea what was going on in those films. There were things like, I don't know, they were getting their stomachs ripped out or something. I don't even know what the subtitles were on about, but it made no sense. I've never done it since, and I wouldn't do it again.
That's a very good point you mentioned, Lauren, about humor getting lost if the subtitles are poorly translated. I guess in a drama, you'd get more of an idea, but if the comedy relies on wordplay, it would be very complicated.
Yeah, so Lauren and I watched a few Turkish comedies with bad subtitles, but they were films that we weren't particularly interested in the first place. And it's like Lauren, I would never do it again. And I actually feel very, very strongly about, watching the films with subtitles. It always amazes me when I see people on the forum or anywhere else telling me, like saying they watched an entire feature film without subtitles. I mean, one example, I remember someone we used to know watched a 90-minute Spanish feature film without subtitles. He didn't speak a word of Spanish. I just cannot understand in any way what someone gets out of a film that has lots of dialogue, without the subtitles. I even find if it's like a 10-minute short without subtitles, even then I wouldn't want to watch it. So that's actually something I do feel strongly about. And also I find it really annoying when you're watching a film with subtitles and the translation is quite bad. Not even Google Translate subs, but just subs that haven't been translated that well. Or occasionally you get this kind of weird thing where like the font or the color of the subtitles doesn't work very well with the background of the film. So things like that I think they have a very negative effect. So Lauren just sent a message saying about Brighter Summer Day, and that is the film I was thinking of actually. I think that film's a great film, but the subtitles in the copy I watched were just really, really difficult to read properly. So it does detract quite a lot from films.
Thinking about issues with subtitles when watching films reminds me of a bugbear I have with Netflix and also Amazon Prime at the moment. They tend to have films on there, international films, and the only English subtitles available will be closed caption subtitles for people who can't hear. So as well as having all of the dialogue on the screen, you'll have things that tell you about the sounds that are happening. So it'll say wind rustling through the trees or children singing in the background. And that really frustrates me because, I'm paying for a service, whether it's Amazon Prime or Netflix, and I want to watch the film. And enjoy it how it's intended to be seen, but having those extra bits of information, the subtitle, it's me because, again, it's just something else that can take you out of the moment and take you out of the film.
I don't think I've ever watched a feature-length film without subtitles. I have watched a few shorts in my time without subtitles, ones that weren't very heavy on language. There's a great film by a director, I'm probably going to pronounce his name correctly, Luc Moulet. A French director did a film called Bars in the early 80s about people trying to jump bars to get into subways. He also did a really cool film about trying to open up a Coke bottle. And it's a really funny film. It's actually absolutely hilarious at times, how difficult it is to open up the Coke bottle. And I watched that Coke one without subtitles. I know a little bit of French because I did French in high school for a year. And I found I was still able to get through it. I understood most of what was going on. If a subbed version of it popped up, I would happily rewatch it. But I don't mind saying that I saw it without subtitles because it wasn't heavy on the dialogue. Google translated subtitles. That's an interesting one. What's interesting is that there's a lot of films these days on YouTube. If the closed captions aren't hard coded, so hard coded means it's directly on the film. You can't get rid of it. If it's something which somebody's added in, YouTube will often do the option of auto translating it, and the auto translates are actually usually pretty good. There's a great film by the Iranian film director Mohsen Makhmalbaf, a film called The Cyclist. It was actually the inspiration for Kiarostami's Close Up. And The Cyclist is only available, or was only available on YouTube with either Portuguese or Spanish subtitles. I put it through the auto translate and it came out almost perfectly and it was very watchable. So can't imagine sitting there and typing in a whole lot of hard-coded subtitles to try and translate them. But YouTube's auto translate works really well. Also, if it's a silent film that's in Spanish or French, I actually know enough Spanish or French that I can watch it with a little bit of Google Translate. That's actually been quite interesting because we had that pop up with a couple of the contemporary Spanish silent films that came up. And I was able to watch those without subtitles. There are a few words that I don't understand. I popped them into Google Translate. Most of it I actually knew. I've actually got enough of a grasp on Spanish and French. I'm not fluent in either language, but I know enough about them that I was able to get through them while only relying a little bit on Google Translate. But obviously, that's not pure enough for people like Tom. If any of my co-hosts want to react to any of that, and then we'll see where we go from there.
So you can find those films with subtitles. I watched them not that long ago. I thought they were okay. They were entertaining enough, but quite repetitive. You know, after you've seen the first minute, you've basically seen the whole film. I mean the two shorts, the French shorts, by the way, in case that's not clear. The Pepsi, the Coke one or whatever, Pepsi.
Okay, yeah, thanks for clarifying that, Adam, because I thought you were saying that Blancanieves was repetitive, and I was going, oh, well, you know, maybe. I can understand why people might find Bars or the Coke one a little bit repetitive, but I don't know, I still found them quite funny myself.
Ah, they were okay. I don't have a problem with them. I liked them to some extent. I just wouldn't put them on my list. I liked the idea, just didn't think it was particularly amazing. Right, we don't have to include this because it's a little bit off topic, but I was wondering when people check a film. So does anyone ever check a film while they're watching it, for example? Because that might go against film purism ideas.
I only ever check a film after I've watched it. Different issues can come up. I'll not be able to watch the whole film, so there's no point jinxing it, I guess. I haven't really seen it until I finished it, so no, I don't check films until I've seen them.
I like the satisfaction of checking it after I've watched it, so I always do it afterwards, unless I know for some reason I'm not going to be able to, like, iCheckMovies will be down or I have to leave straight away, but generally it's always afterwards.
It's obviously always afterwards for me as well, but I think it's important to watch it to the end because up until the very end you may not know whether it's due to be a favourite or a dislike, and also because I use other sites as well. I check movies like IMDb and Letterboxd. I need to have seen the full film to determine what rating I'm going to give it, which I can't do until the end of the film.
It's normally the end for me. I mean, I don't normally use the favourite function, but I have occasionally checked one before the end. if it's something I'm not enjoying, and I feel like if I check it, it will give me some weird kind of motivation just to get through the last 20 minutes or something like that.
I think it's been great hearing from everyone about their views on film purism. Quite surprised to know that I'm the most extreme out of my co-hosts today, but it is good to know that there are certain aspects of my film viewing habits that are shared with others, even if they don't necessarily agree with all the extreme lengths I go to when sitting down to watch a film.
Thanks, Tom. I agree. It was great listening to everybody and hearing their views on film purism. I know it's a subject that I've been talking about a bit on and off with Tom over the past few weeks, and I was trying to wonder whether it's just me or whether everybody is trying to be a film purist. So I thought it was good having Adam and Lauren in there for a little bit of halfway in between. Some things a bit more pure, some things a little bit less pure. And hopefully by the end of this podcast, people listening will be able to make a decision themselves about where they sit on the film purism spectrum, what things they might try. Maybe they'll try watching films with the lights off if they haven't already. Maybe they'll try watching a film while doing treadmilling if they haven't already. Who knows? It'll be great if anybody listening can give us feedback on the forum about how you've changed your habits after listening to us.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it too. It was nice to have a range of opinions, from Tom's purism view to ours. And also, thanks, Saul. I think you've done a great job today.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting seeing how differently we all perceive purity, I guess, and none of us all completely match up with how pure we are on each of those different aspects of film watching. So yeah, it was really interesting listening to all the different perspectives on it.
Okay, everybody, thanks for joining in. I found it a very dynamic discussion today, and hopefully our listeners will find it equally as interesting to listen to.
You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.